This is the reflection for the third Sunday after Easter. This last week has had two major events, one about a death, and the other about the new freedoms we have after lockdown. The first event is the death, of course, of the Duke, the huge coverage of every aspect of his 99 years of life, a privileged life, yet lived to the full, with service to his wife, the Queen, his country, and Commonwealth, and his enthusiasms for engineering and technology, his concern for the environment, and his Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. So now, after the 8 days of mourning and the funeral, he can rest in peace, and we can move on enriched by his legacy. And secondly, during this last week, we've enjoyed the opening up of hairdressers, for instance, pub gardens, non-essential shops, and libraries. It does seem as if we're making progress, and this spring sunshine encourages us all. And then the progress of the vaccination program is good news as well. And so now to our theme for the third Sunday of Easter. We remember that Easter lasts a whole 50 days. We are going to move up through the Ascension to Pentecost. I was looking through my liturgical resources for the Easter season and being reminded that we have the stations of the resurrection. In fact, there are 19 of them. We're more familiar with the stations of the cross, but these stations of the resurrection take us from the earthquake that was nature's response to the death of Christ on the cross, through the many resurrection appearances recorded in the Gospel, finally to the conversion of Saul, the persecutor, who becomes Paul, the missionary, letter writer, and martyr. I'd rather like to see paintings of these events, resurrection events, placed around our churches for the 50 days of Easter, just as we have stations of the cross. Now the Gospel for today, that is the third Sunday, is about the disciples, the 11 of them, and companions meeting together. And suddenly, Luke tells us, Jesus is in their midst, greeting them with the familiar words, "Peace be with you, shalom." Their reaction is first fear and then doubt. So Jesus emphasizes he is still flesh and blood and bears the wounds of the cross. He even says, "Touch me and see. I'm not a ghost." He eats the fish that he is offered. And then he gives them a lesson from the Hebrew Scriptures, from the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms, all of which point to his suffering and death and his rising on the third day. This reflects very much the experience of Cleopas and his companion as they walked along the way to Emmaus, meeting the stranger. The reading from the Acts of the Apostles has Peter addressing the people after he and John had healed a lame man at the temple gate. Peter says, "You Israelites, why do you marvel at this? It is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who has glorified his servant Jesus, who has restored this man to health." Peter, a leader of the Jerusalem church, is witnessing with amazing confidence and authority. And then he calls for the crowd to repent, to turn to God with their sins forgiven. We have only had 2 weeks in the Easter season, yet we are overwhelmed by the change from suffering and death, sorrow and despair, into a group of disciples overjoyed with the strange and remarkable presence of the risen Lord. And we are inheritors of the theme of these stories of new life, of change and of transformation, of confidence and joy. These experiences are for us today to make real in our lives in amazing ways and in everyday ways. The fact that the church is still in business after 2,000 years is a powerful testimony to the enduring power of the resurrection stories. this Jesus who was crucified, still lives in the hearts, minds, and communities of Christians the world over. I was watching a program on TV, probably during Holy Week, about the Cistercian monks who live at St. Bernard's Monastery in Leicestershire. I visited that monastery a couple of times a long time ago. It was a film about their daily life, about their worship, and about their work, about the care of the elderly monks, and indeed the very frank facing of the death of two of their monks in community and witnessing their burial service. One of the things, though, about this film was that they had given up their dairy herd, which was the way in which they had sustained their monastery and paid the bills. And they needed a new venture to generate income. And so the abbot, with his wise men, looked back to the great monastic tradition, especially as is expressed in Belgium and the monasteries there. And they decided that it was the best way forward was to brew beer, Trappist beer. And so they put a brewery, a modern one, into the cattle shed and began selling their new brew to friends and friendly retailers and outlets and the local pubs. A new venture, opening up a new way of sustaining their life of prayer and service as witnesses to the resurrection. Secondly, here is St. Mary's, our new venture in the housing project in partnership with the charity Hope Interaction, furnishing a local house for a homeless family and supporting the family as they settle in and find their way forward. It's a very practical form of resurrection, a new beginning.